Welcome to day 103 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tom Lenz, and I'm back. Oh, thanks for hanging with me and sticking there with us. We're here talking about black issues in America, coming at it from all sides and angles, historical, emotional, maybe to stick some biblical in there, and just to get an understanding, start a conversation around black life in America, getting better, getting worse, stagnant, hit a ceiling, a potential for greatness, all these things. As I come here now, day 103, two thoughts have emerged as I continue this project. First thought has two parts. First part is the black community perpetuating the slave mind, um, as far as behaving badly, poorly, hindering itself. We've got the recent assassination, murder of Nipsey Hussle, and it turned into a kind of a martyrdom affair. I think that backfired on the forces that may have been arrayed against him. That's an example of black people behaving badly. Um, Passivity, expecting power structures to care for us, is that being passed along from generation to generation? Also, the second part, as you might guess, is the white mind, is expectation of privilege, feelings of entitlement, um, you know, just knowing that being white it's kind of a hall pass in the world. Is that attitude passed on from generation to generation? And then my second thought is a concern for financial literacy. I actually don't care what people think about me to a degree. It's this idea that I'm being robbed or prevented. Um, my access to wealth and resources is being resisted. That's a problem for me, and I'm doing my part, getting some financial literacy together. But the black community needs to kind of make a concerted effort um, to take the time out to make it happen. Our educational system is all about preparing us to be someone else's employee. It's perpetuating slavery, is what the educational system does. And it doesn't teach us the fundamental things about how this world is working and how finances are made, why these are ceilings, not just because we were slaves and stuff like that, but tax structure, corporate structure, how do things work? This passive existence, especially economically, is unacceptable. And we need to know and understand how to get a leg up. I do want to say a word of caution on that note, is that I've noticed, if we look at history, you'll see the bar is always getting raised. Like I use the illustration of the minimum wage. We raise the minimum wage, and it's like some kind of triumph. I don't. It's no triumph. It's relative. You know, you increase minimum wage, um, prices go up. Inflation's always kicking in. Dollars has less power than it did, and it's diminishing. We're weak against the euro. I kind of looked that up. I forget which um, signer of the Declaration we were talking about, but it made me look up our strength against the European, and their 80 cents equals are $1 or dollars a week against them. So that's some of the things we need to look at. I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. He talks about these issues much more eloquently than I can. He's researched, he's lived it much longer than I. He's seen it from the inside when he was his work with President Jimmy Carter and different educational systems around the country, Florida and Michigan, respectively. So he's plugged in. He knows what he's talking about. I read 3 of his works. I want you to get these books. A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black History, White Wealth, Search for Power, and Economic Justice, and his national plan to empower Black America. Powernomics. Don't be fooled by the copyright dates and stuff like that. It's all relative and all very relevant to what's going on today's. A lot of that stuff is historical. His national plan to empower Black America is very aggressive. There's some things I think need to happen collectively, but I think individually we can take some of those concepts out of that book and begin to apply them. We also take a fictional look at slave life in America, and I think that's important because Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe's phenomenal work, it'll give us an illustration of the inside workings of slave life in America. It's a fictional context, but I believe it's got a lot of historical basis. We get stereotypes between black and white people, blackface from that book, a lot of things. So we take some story time. After we finish this series, we'll get back into some story time. We're 103 days in, coming up on a third of the way. So I've got to kind of check my schedules and maybe structure some of this, but I don't think we're in any danger of. There's some milestones I want to reach before the end of the year. I finished that book and some other things I want to get to. You'll see behind me, #us2. I keep that thrown up there. It's the Black women coming together. There's a lot of other interest there, but mostly black women. It's kind of a response to the #MeToo movement, where there's a bunch of white women collecting and getting together, supporting one another. You can also go to Black Enough, BLAGGENUF. Dr. Claude Anderson, he's all over YouTube. You can find him at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. All right, let's continue with our journey. Day 103 brings us our next 2 interviewees. We'll finish our H's today, and the next, our second participant today is a very well-known individual. First person up is Samuel Huntington, born in 1731, died 1796, representative from Connecticut to the Second Continental Congress. He was also a Supreme Court justice, lawyer, governor of Connecticut for a time. These men, it's a cross-section of colonialism. So you got your superstars, Benjamin Franklin. Who did we get the other day? Benjamin Franklin. John Quincy Adams of Amistad fame. You watch the movie. That's Anthony Hopkins is playing John Quincy Adams. there. Benjamin Franklin. I mentioned, oh, John Hancock, another popular name. You got those superstars, and then you got guys that were being chased by the British, some in prison, little guys. So Samuel Huntington doesn't, nothing stands out. I'm referencing Wikipedia, so you're not getting a whole lot of traction there. We're just, these are just conversation pieces as we have these mock interviews. So with Samuel Huntington, there wasn't much on him because there were just no big highlights. He was just, I picture him just as a common dude in the colonies, just getting along. You need those people. I think I'm one of those people. Just kind of leave me alone. And I'm going through, I was born, I'm going to die. In between, I'd like to do some good. That's what I get from Justice Huntington. Congregationalists, the Congregationalists, they had the autonomy of their congregations. There was one Roman Catholic, but everybody else either has no religion listed, or they come from a Protestant vein of the church. Not to get into any controversies or anything like that, but the Protestants, there was a religious line as far as some of the motivations behind the war, but it was mostly economical. So he was a Congregationalist. I just have him down as abstained from slavery. There's nothing about slavery with him. You ain't going to find much about slavery with the northern colonies. There's a few that had some slaves and stuff. I think it was John Hancock had slaves that were free, but they were house slaves, probably treated pretty well. If I'm associating them with the right signer of the Declaration. So the slavery up north, slavery's bad all around, but slavery up north was, there was more integration, I will say, with slavery. Though wasn't Disneyland to be someone else's property, but it wasn't Deep South's brutal work you to death slavery. There's degrees of slavery. Samuel Huntington, though he doesn't, I don't find anything about him associated with slavery. He was he was very busy, though, speaking out. He was one of the most outspoken signers of the Declaration of Independence. He's critical of what was called coercive acts by the British. Now, these were acts or different procedures, laws, rules from Britain, mostly as a response to the Boston Tea Party and other types of resistance in the colonies. It's two big dogs on the block, and one makes their move, then the other's got to escalate. And as the next one's got to escalate. And we got to escalate until we have war. I'm starting to get a little jittery around, the United States and, Russia, China. We got some big dogs on this planet, and we are getting polarized. It seems that every little chunk of peace ends up being moving backwards 2 or 3 steps, um, digressing in our relations with other parts of the world, and we're not the only superpower. We're at such a point in warfare on planet Earth where it's just destruction of the world is the only option. When it's not, we won't have any conventional boots on the ground type things. We just have very big and deadly bombs with blast radius of miles. It's all. I mean, we make these things. It's incredible. So that's the. He signed the Declaration, trying to push back against the British economic reasons in there. Next guy is pretty famous, Mr. Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States, born 1743, died 1826. So he was one of the younger men to sign the Declaration. About 33, I'm guessing. Oh, a lot of interest that we know. His famous home, Monticello. I think there are secret passages up there. The lawyer, surveyor, architect, on and on. And this is brings me to that white privilege, and the opportunities had by all of these signers, of course, these white men. But some of these white men were just superstars of privilege. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Hancock. Some of the highlights out there. John Quincy Adams. Now here with him, though he was a deist, and the deists believed God, boom, created Earth and stepped off. Doesn't interact in our everyday lives and stuff like that, as many other Christian circles believe. So the deist is kind of a interesting position. There's no consciousness. There's not a whole lot of fear in the dealings in the world and how one carries oneself. If God's not here now, just kind of keep your act basically clean, and because you'll meet him later on. But as far as the present, no, it's all man's efforts and whatnot. So I say that because with the deist, this apathy towards human suffering comes to play. He was a man that struggled with debt a lot, but he had massive holdings. His father willed him 5,000 acres and 52 slaves at the age of 24. He's representing Virginia, I might add as well. And that number grew. The number of slaves grew to 600. And but he had problems with that. And a lot of these guys, actually, we find in Harriet Beecher Stowe's book that Tom's troubles begin when his first master gets in financial trouble from gambling. These guys gamble, and to pay their debts, well, just sell off a few niggas and it's all good. That's how they settle their debts. And Thomas Jefferson, no different. And I mentioned all that, the debt and the number of slaves, because on one hand, he would publicly kind of denounce slavery and talk about kind of a progressive emancipation, not wholesale manumission. They'll just turn the slaves loose. but he was, on paper anyway, recorded as being kind of opposed to slavery and working on ways to turn that around. But in practice, everybody's got their little hypocrisy. In practice, he had hundreds of slaves and whatnot. Interesting note that, and this is years ago, I believe I saw it on Oprah Winfrey, where some of his descendants, slave descendants, black folks, sued and got a portion of his estate. Got some financial reparations from all that. And this speaks to the slave owners. Often and this is common practice. The slave owners often went into their slave women. I'm guessing these men had a lot of virgins, slept with a lot of women, that was offspring, but weren't invited into the family, of course. The offspring were cast out as slaves, And it was interesting. I forget what I was doing, but I was seeing the percentage of increase in slaves, imported slaves, over time, and the numbers weren't adding up. It's not a linear thing, It's not a constant, There's a beginning point and there's a peak, and it drops off. But it's not linear as you would think. And I'm like, as far as importing slaves, importing Africans. So I said, hold on, something's not right here, because we got a lot of slaves, but the influx doesn't match, So it dawned on me, they weren't just importing slaves to boost that population. These slave owners were building their own slaves, by sleeping with their slave women. So that explained discrepancies. If you do some math and you look at some statistics, you'll understand what I'm saying. And it's sad. If you remember the movie Roots, Alex Haley, and one of his ancestors, Chicken George, was actually the result of his mother, Kizzy, being raped by her master. And Chicken George, he's that white man's son, but he's put out there from the slaves. He had an all right life. He fought chickens, but still a slave. And that was Thomas Jefferson's progeny, having their voice there years ago. Pretty sure it's easy to find. So deist. Now he signed, he promote rights and stuff. He was the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence, the framer. There was some talk in there in the Wikipedia about strong ties to England. So he's educated there and having, sure he was exposed, to a lot of procedures and orders in councils and chambers and things like that, politics, being a representative, and how all those things combined. So that's his story there, Thomas Jefferson. Thanks for hanging out with me again. Not much to say. We're kind of getting into a rhythm here, tell us a little about yourself, religion and slavery, why did you sign? Read the brief notes and you get a even clearer picture if I missed anything. Comment, write in. So I'd love some feedback. If you get on my email list, that's a private email list. It's not a community yet. I don't know if it will ever be. But if you get on my email list, I don't share it like these other people say they don't share it. But it's apparently a lucrative business. Fear not, you won't be shared. I'm Thomas Nyback. Thanks for hanging out with me. Day 103, out of the way of 365 days towards racial change. I'll see you tomorrow.